Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Everyday Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Paul Howard Flowers Jr., and this is the Potpourri Place podcast show. Today, we've got a phenomenal guest from across the pond, Mr. Andy Ide, founder of Horse Records. Now, if you're a .com person, you can put .com after that, but it's really horserecords.info because when it comes to the company, as we've learned, it's about the information, and having accurate information is key. Andy, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thanks, Paul. G'day to you. G'day to all your listeners. It's good to be here.
Excellent. And for our Audible listeners that might have heard a little bit of difference in tonality, Andy, would you tell us where we're calling in from today?
Yeah, I'm in South Australia, which is obviously in Australia. It's sort of in the middle and down the bottom of Australia. I'm almost directly on the other side of the world. So, g'day.
Beautiful. And the beautiful part of this, Andy, is that with technology, we're right here. We're having an instantaneous conversation. And when we had initially connected, I did some digging on what you do and realized that it was surprising to me that I hadn't heard more about you here in the States. Andy, if you would give us a brief overview before we dive into some other aspects of who is
Yeah.
Andy, but if you would give us a brief overview of Horse Records, kind of how it was in the beginning and how it came to be.
Yeah, no worries, Paul. So I'm a software engineer by training. I had a website business back in the early days, and I married a horse girl, which was no one warned me what would occur in my life because of that. They were all laughing at the wedding, and no one told me the joke. But I think the horse people listening will understand. So I was a city boy married into a horse family. My wife and her mother, my mother-in-law, run the oldest Australian stock horse stud in South Australia
Hmm,
and one of the oldest in Australia. So the Australian stock horse is like the American quarter horse. It's a
okay.
working horse that, what you guys have cowboys, we've got jackaroos and jillaroos. So it's a working horse that's used around Australia. And one day I was fixing a fence or something, and she walked up to me and she said, I'm sick of having to record stuff in notebooks, and then my notebooks degrade and then they fall apart and then they get filed in a box somewhere. I can never find the box. And someone called me about a horse I bred 15 years ago, and they wanted to know how it was breaking in.
Hmm,
And she's like, I did my best, but I couldn't remember the finer details. And of course, the notebook's in some attic somewhere, never to be found again. And she said, hey, can you do something online so I can just check online for this sort of information? And being a good husband and a strapper that actually listens, I coded up horse records for our stud and ran that for a couple of years. And then after that, my wife said, "Why don't you expand it and let other people use this technology?" So I rewrote it with what I'd learned from managing our stud for a couple of years. By the way, a stud in Australia would be called a ranch or a farm. What I'd run for us and expanded out, and that was Horse Records. So we launched in May 2021, and yeah, we're coming up to 4 years in
absolutely.
a couple of weeks. Wow, that's gone quick.
Right.
So when I coded Horse Records, I thought not everyone is a stock horse stud.
Hmm,
There are There's all sorts of events. So we've got some cattle events like a camp draft, which is running a horse around. You guys have got reining. There's polo cross. There's polo, eventing, cross country, endurance like they do in the Middle East.
right.
There was a movie Hidalgo about that, which is like marathon running but for horses. And there's dressage and all these different types of events. So what I did when I coded is I made it really customizable. So when I built it, I give you some standard types of things you can do with it. You can record your farrier, your dentist, your vet stuff, your performance, like what they win for you, the training you do, the feed and the gear. And I give you the basics and a standardized section of there. But if you do something different, you can add that in. So it can be customizable for your discipline and your breed. I don't know what every discipline does down to the minutest detail, but you can add it there. So customize it how you go, how you do stuff. I think that's the major strength of horse records is that you log in, you see what needs to be done, and then you can add what you do, how you want, and related to your specialization or discipline within the horse world. There's
Okay.
also a whole breeding section. So if you
Okay.
breed horses, there's mare scan tools and records of stay-ins and all sorts of things that horse people need. Yeah.
Oh, we're definitely going to dive into some more of the details of it because I'm interested, like I'd shared with you prior to, for a couple of reasons, namely because
Mm,
of my work outside of the podcast and
mm,
communications world and insurance. And, accuracy is key, right? And having the right
mm,
information at the right time is absolutely key. And quite
mm.
frankly, from the research that I've done on horse records prior to the show, I think you're solving a major, major problem. But I want to go back before we go
Yep.
forward.
Yes.
You'd mentioned that the anniversary is coming up, so we're just
Mm.
about to the 4 year mark. Would you happen to know the day? I know you said in a couple of weeks, but would you happen to know the day? I'm curious.
It was May the 1st.
Huh. All right, so not quite May the 4th be with you from all my
No,
Star Wars fans out there,
if
but
only,
May the
if I,
1st.
there was a lot going on. I should have delayed it 3 days.
It's just one of those things, right? We
Yep.
some of us out here are a little on the I don't mind saying the nerd side, right? Nerd
Yep.
power.
Oh, yeah.
We love our nice puns, and May the 4th is definitely a fun one. So May the 1st, 2025, you're coming up on 4 years. Let's go
Yes.
back to the beginning. As one of the purposes of the everyday entrepreneur is to make sure that people that are curious about going into the entrepreneur space, people that
Mm,
want to know what it's like, what they can expect,
mm.
they have examples, right, of
Yep.
real life people that have started something out of nothing. So
Mm,
you'd mentioned that you were married into this life. If you don't
mm.
mind me asking, for how long were you married prior to launching Horse Records?
Ooh. So I started coding it in January 2019, and we were married in, well, here we go. Here's the test.
She's gonna
2008.
hear this,
So
by the way.
cheers, yeah. 2008. So it's yeah, so that's 12 years. So yeah, that was when I started coding it. Horse
Okay.
records. I'd had the stud one for a few years before that. So
Okay.
yeah, that's about right. I'm thinking back to when the kids were born, and yeah, they were very little when I, when I was coding.
Absolutely. They have the look
Yeah.
good quiz. Now, again, for my audible listeners, you guys can't tell, but he's blushing a little bit because we asked that question. And like I said, the missus is gonna hear this at some point. So for all
Yeah.
you out there listening, know those dates because you never
Yeah.
know when
It
someone's
was
gonna guess,
nice knowing you
right?
guys. We had some laughs.
So tell me, from your perspective, coming from the software and technology space,
Mm,
seeing the development of her business and what she does with the horses, and feel free to expand
mm,
on some of that
mm,
timeline if you would. But what was one of the major things for you that said, you know, a I could do this? If you
mm.
share.
Uh, I think because I was coming from the angle of software engineering, it was my day job. I was working 5 days a week as a software engineer for a national company.
Mhm.
And I think coming the merging of the two expertises, and because I was coming from the software engineering angle, the angle I was coming from just was a really sweet spot. Um, I think if I'd been a horse person, I would have been overwhelmed by the technology.
Mm.
Where coming from the technology side, I was overwhelmed by the horse stuff, but I had the subject matter experts who could help me. And horses are running around, and there was a period of learning about horses when I got married. So I think it was just knowing that I could do it. It I could code these sorts of softwares. It was just I needed kind of a subject um, to code about,
Okay.
and that it just was I guess luck is a point, but it just sort of was a melding of interests that really worked. I was always quite confident because what people were saying to me, they're saying, "Oh, is this hard?" And I'm like, "No,
Mm.
that's not hard." And then they go, "Oh, you could do this. This is easy, right?" And you're like, "No, that one's really hard." So they say, "Oh, just add AI." Oh, great. So, that's quite difficult. But if they said, "I need a form, an extra form," you're like, "Yeah, no, that's no problems because that's bread and butter stuff." So yeah, I think it was just the angle I was coming from really hit a sweet spot in the market there.
So you mentioned luck. We're talking about timing. You've had
Mm,
the obviously experience of years of being in and around the space. And it
mm,
sounds like there was you mentioned the word confidence, right? A certain
mm.
level of belief in yourself that
Yeah.
you had the necessary skills to solve the problem. Now, it
Mm,
wasn't necessarily your problem to solve, as again, you married into that space.
mm,
And it was your wife, if I heard that correctly, your wife that had the inspiration, or excuse me,
mm.
the problem that was expressed to you,
Yes.
where
Yes.
she brought to you a problem and you were like, hey, I can do this. Uh,
Yes.
Talk about how she plays a role in the development of the company today from that origin point to now.
Yeah. So my wife Kim is on horses, a subject matter expert. As horse people live and breathe horses, it's horses, horses, horses all the time generally. The fact my wife wasn't already using software was surprising. It meant that there was nothing really out there that was suiting her needs. I do have competitors, but I think I'm more flexible, I'm newer and more, certainly you can customize it a lot more than the competitors. So the fact my wife wasn't using one was very strange because she knows kind of everything that's going on
Mhm.
in the industry. She Her initial thing was these are the sorts of events I want to record. So I want to record farrier, which is the hooves of a horse. You've got to do them every few weeks. Dentistry, a horse has to have its teeth done every year, roughly,
Mhm.
because they constantly grow, and you have to literally file them
Bowing
off.
down, right?
Yeah, and um, then there's obviously all the veterinary stuff. Whenever a vet comes, there's drugs given, a horse gets gelded, you need to record that. And, a horse is born, you need to record that.
Mhm.
If it has any issues when it's born, you need to uh, add medication, so you put that in. So she was really specific on what she wanted to record. And then over time, we added a few more, but it was a pretty good first stab. Running a test or a pilot for those 2 years
Mhm.
for just our stud worked really well in that respect because we honed out a lot of the rough edges. And then when we got to horse records, it was a lot of that first stuff you pick up in a pilot had been solved.
Okay.
And then it's the next edge case that you fix and the next edge case. She's Admittedly, the horse knowledge is not needed as much now, but I know that if I ever need anything, I can go to her and say, "Oh, what's the horse's resting heart rate?" and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, yeah, you need to know that. Yeah.
Now, again, coming from my world in the insurance space, it seems
Mm.
like having details down to the minutia are really, really important. You mentioned having a horse's resting heart rate. Like, I don't know what that would be used for, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So it
Oh,
seems
I
like,
can tell you, Paul. So horses have a heart rate of, oh, sorry, let's just pick temperature just because I know that one.
okay.
It's something like 38 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Um, so pretty close to humans. I think it's a little bit one or two off. But
Okay.
some horses run hot who have a higher resting heart rate or a higher temperature. And some horses are a little bit cooler, just depending on maybe the breed, the age, the horse itself. Just
Okay.
like humans, some people have a resting heart rate of 50 beats per minute, others are 70. So with horses, it's important. I have a tab in my horses called vitals where you can record vitals whenever they happen.
Mhm.
So the vet might record the heart rate and you say, "Oh, what's that?" And they go, "Oh, it's 39." So you put that in. And then the temperature, they might do the temperature and then the capillary refill rate. So you press on their gums and see how quick it goes from white to pink.
Huh.
And And then there's obviously things like, does the horse look alert? What's its condition like? Is it fat? Is it skinny? And it's important in that to know the horse is normal. So when everything's fine, what are these numbers normally? What's
Okay.
its respiration rate? How often does it breathe? And you can record that fairly easily. Um, so that when they get sick, you can sort of say this is the deviation from their normal.
Okay.
Or you can say the horse was sick, but its heart rate was the same as normal. So there's something going on there. Or the horse is looking unwell. Everything is normal, but its abdominal sounds are bad, and that can lead to colic, which is a common thing with horses. But it also means you can say to the vet, this is my horse's normal. This is what they were like when they had a cold a year ago, and now we know what they are now, and the vet can then have more information to help make the decision. And I guess, yeah, that information is kept very tightly.
Okay. Okay. And I didn't want to dive too much into the software yet, but that just brought about a really interesting question. And again, not being out there in the field with horses myself, but
Mm,
having ridden a few and really had a really good time.
yeah.
I think about the mannerisms and like how a horse
Mm,
can move a certain way and like knock you off or knock a phone out of your pocket or something. When
yeah.
it comes
Yeah.
to keeping these records, I'm curious,
Mhm.
what platforms does a person use? Like, is this an iPad thing or is it a cell phone or do they need to be on a laptop? Like, how do you actually record the data in real time?
Okay. I have a lot of strong opinions on this sort of thing, being a software engineer. What Horse Records is it's a website, but it's mobile enabled, which means
Okay.
you can you can access it on any device that has a web browser, which is a mobile, or a cell phone, a tablet,
Okay.
or a laptop, or a desktop, and it just adjusts itself to look good on a mobile or look good on a desktop, depending what you're doing.
Got it.
What that means is I'm not beholden to the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, which is very important to me.
Okay.
And it
Gotcha.
also means when I push an update, everyone gets it right there and then. There's none of this 1, 2 week delay that Apple Store are known for. Or
Mm.
so someone rings up with an urgent bug or an urgent error, I can fix that, push the fix, and everyone gets the fix immediately. Next time they log in, it's there. So
Okay.
that to me is really really important. Plus, I thought this is a long-term thing. People are keeping going to keep their records for years and decades.
Right.
I don't want to be beholden to a third party if I don't have to be. So yeah, that's why.
Right.
And what you can do, by the way, is you can save. I give instructions when you join up to save the website as an icon on your phone. So it looks
There we
just like
go.
an app.
Okay.
You never know. So you get the icon of the horse's head, which is like this thing here,
Okay.
and you
I see
click
it's a
on
really
that,
nice
and up
logo.
comes the, yeah, and it's also behind me as well.
Yep. Yeah, for my Audible folks, you can't see it, but I urge you to, when this publishes, go ahead and take a look at the video version because it is a really slick looking logo.
Yeah, my wife actually drew it. She's an artist.
Wow.
So she drew the horse, and I think this was only her third effort. And yeah, I made that into the logo. So she's very talented woman.
You know what? We're going to switch gears here for just a second because again, it's about the business, all right? It's about an entrepreneur, and there's more to an entrepreneur than just what they do. It's also who they are. And
Mm.
in your case, you married into this. I'm
Mhm.
eternally curious. A couple questions I may have on this. Shout out to a good friend of mine, Dr. Ari, who I actually borrowed this question from. You said your wife's name was Kim, was that right?
Mhm. Mhm.
How did you know that Kim was the person that you wanted to spend the rest of your life with?
I, when we first met, I remember we met outside a movie theater because we were going to a movie, and I immediately felt this insane comfortableness in her presence I'd never felt with anyone before.
Mhm.
And she had this sort of half smile on her face as I got up and introduced myself. I must have looked a bit gawky or something. And and we were watching this movie and it was a shocker. It was so bad. And I was like, I just want to walk out. And I didn't because, it's the first date and stuff. And at the end of it, I said to Kim, look, that movie, it wasn't good. I really just wanted to walk out halfway through, she said. And I said, but I stayed because, first date. She goes, I wanted to walk out too about halfway through, but I stayed for the first date. So that was very much the beginning of the saga. So
Love it.
yeah, I think that was about then. I was pretty, 90% sure that
That
this
she
was
was the
the,
one.
the woman for me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I love it. So, and of course, we talked about how she provided the inspiration, and she was in an almost entirely different world than you, coming from
Mm.
the city and her being in the equine life. Tell me, how did you all even come to meet one another?
We met online back in the day. It was one of the early back in, yeah. These days, meeting online is very common.
Right.
Back then,
Right.
it wasn't as common. Um, my wife actually has she's just reminded me off to the side that she has a computer science degree, which I forgot about.
Right.
So she was pretty technologically minded. So I think that's why she naturally was online, and that's why I was online, just trying it out. So yeah, we just met online, and then we met for a movie, and turned out we lived fairly close to each other, which was great, and
Love it.
that made it pretty straightforward from then on. Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And I think I started off this show with commenting about how through technology, right, through the internet, we're able to have a conversation real time, looking at each
Mm,
other, everything except for the warm handshake. But it's
mm,
instantaneous. And this world is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm just really appreciative. So I like to take a moment out just to express gratitude for the technology that's available to
it's
make this
amazing.
connection that we have happen. But back to the juicy stuff, back to the we started
Yep.
out. So you all got together, and she comes from a computer science background and is obviously
Mm,
in the world of horses. You're
mm,
from the city. Can you talk about how that evolution of a relationship evolved, as again you're coming from different spaces
yep.
working to essentially form a family and a unit?
Mm. Um, I think it happened reasonably naturally. Um, I do remember my body taking about a year to get used to just all the physical work that's farm life.
So she worked you.
Uh, oh, mate. Yeah. So most of my weekends are fixing fences, pretty much, or things related to horses, physically, and then during the week I'm working, of course. Um, I think it even though we come from quite disparate worlds, I think we think the same. Um, we have the same way of managing the children, so we parent the same,
Mm,
which is pretty rare. So we're basically the same with that. So there's a lot of agreements there. It just so happens that Kim was brought up on horses and I wasn't, and I was more technologically focused. Um, and it was, I was programming games uh, in the late 80s when I was young, in little simple text games.
okay.
So I think it was a case of, on the surface, it seems like we're totally different, but I think once you get past that surface, there's actually a real lot in common about how we think and what's important to us and our values and what our goals are, both in life and financially, etc.
Mhm.
So yeah, it sort of works like that. So while we don't look the same just on the surface, I think deep down there's so much compatibility there that's it just makes it easy because I can say, Kim, I've got to do this podcast in the wee hours of the morning, and she goes, great, I'll be asleep. So this one's not too bad. It's 8:30 a.m. in Australia, so
Okay.
it's my morning, so it's not too bad.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. And you mentioned an important word. I wasn't going to say it unless you did, so I'm glad you brought it up. Compatibility. When it
Mm,
comes to
mm,
creating something, obviously you all have began a family unit, and that's evolved into a business. So that
mm,
compatibility is key, you'd say.
mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think if you look at what you're doing, you sort of the projects that I've worked, I've had a deep passion for, like an internal burning flame to to do them because that helps you get over the bad parts.
Mm,
Um, I've always said success is a staircase, not an elevator. It's 1 foot forward at a time. It's grinding. It's doing regular, consistent work,
mm,
and it's not doing something and hoping for a big win that you hear about on TV and stuff all the time. But that's you only hear about the big wins. You don't hear about all the people who were big losses. Um, where if you're constantly putting your foot in front of each other each day, doing something each day, over time that success builds, and then something happens. I don't know, karma, but something happens. You're just in the right place at the right time. And people say, oh, look at that guy who came from nowhere and suddenly his horse software is worldwide. And you're like, yeah, but you haven't looked at the decade behind of doing something every day. That internal flame is what keeps you putting 1 foot in front of the other, keeps you grinding. Hustling, I think, is the word you guys use. It
absolutely.
keeps you going, keeps you going, and it needs to be a sustainable effort. Yeah, sustainable is another bit. So that I think that's when it comes to sort of the entrepreneurship I've done, it's always been, and the projects that I've worked, the inner flame that just keeps you going every day. Um,
Excellent.
yeah,
Okay.
rather than just waiting for the next big win or gambling, hoping that you'll hit it big.
Pay
Yeah.
out from that. A mentor of mine told me that life is not a lotto. And after that, I
Hmm.
stopped buying lotto tickets. Now, on occasion,
Yeah.
it's 600 million, right? Yes, I'm going to
Yeah,
spend
you throw one
$2 on
in. Yeah, I do that
that.
too. Yeah.
And, hey, you got to play to win. So you
Yeah.
mentioned the consistency of the grind and the effort that it took. And
Hmm.
you often hear about the successes, and obviously coming into your fourth year. Now, you've been in now several countries with horse
Hmm.
records. And
Hmm.
we hear about the success now that you're having. Our listeners may care about the not so happy times.
Yeah.
Could you share with us? And I'm assuming that there might be some even to and through the last few years, but oftentimes early on in the beginning, you mentioned the inner flame, so we know that there has to be that drive
Hmm.
there. But talk about some of the hurdles that you actually had to overcome in getting this off the ground.
Yeah. So I think the first big one came in 2020. It wasn't COVID, although that was the year of COVID. It was I wanted to launch in about November 2020 because I was ready. And my wife said, no, you need to add this feature or no one will buy it. And I went, you hear this minimal viable product concept, release fast, iterate often, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I like to temper that because I think the way it is presented is this minimum viable product, get it out, iterate, move fast, break things, all that. I think it's a bit too gung ho and it leads to the um, promoting of chaos if you don't get the subtlety. What I like to do, yeah, so I was sort of on that side of it, and my wife said, no, you need to add this feature. I can't even remember what it was. It was so long ago. And I went, can they do without it? Yes, they can do without it. But I thought, I've been going almost 2 years. What's a few more months going to do? So I tempered that sort of release often concept and mantra that you often hear. I actually think it's a bit over the top. Um, anyway, so I had to deal not just with coding the new thing, that wasn't an issue, but also the mental possible depression, the mental health behind going, I thought I was ready and I'm not. And I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I've got months to go and I'm still, I wanted to launch. So sometimes you just don't get what you want. But I guess you can get what you need because when I released that feature, everyone was like, this is great.
It
Um,
was a hit.
and then another one was when, and this happens a bit, you do everything you can and you don't see a result.
Mm.
And that can be hard. So, for example, I had a lot of people launching on the first day because I set up a Facebook page and used that almost as a developer log
Mhm.
of what I was doing. So as I created, wrote a feature, I would put up screenshots and videos on my Facebook page, on the Horse Records Facebook page, which is actually a tip I suggest to many,
Okay.
is set up a developer log so you can start building your customer base and those that are excited as you build it, and they come back with feedback as you say, here's a new feature. Um, so after launch, a few weeks after launch, I was sitting there and going, why aren't people joining? Why aren't they signing up? And I'd gone from that high of launch and having lots of people join because they've been following me on the developer log to suddenly going to the right now we're in the constant finding customers, showing them horse records and hoping they buy. So I'd moved from that initial sugar hit and rather than going down to normal, it's sort of gone down. So it's sort of like a few days of feeling a bit down
Mhm.
and then realizing that, hey, this is kind of normal. I had a pretty good hit last week. This week, it's changed and things like that inner fire and that passion and knowing that what you're doing is the right thing is what gets you through those issues. So, I mean, have I coded projects that I have no passion for? Yes, I have. Did they suck? Yes. Were they hard? Yes, they were really hard. And if anything had kind of gone wrong, I would have been in real trouble, but luckily I was getting paid, you know. But the projects I've done for myself, there's a lot of half-done projects that I've just lost the passion for and just
Mhm.
they're sitting on the side of the road somewhere, I don't know, back there.
Well, you bring up a couple of really good points. And
Mm,
so I'm going to go back to one of the first things that you mentioned was
hmm
something like a sort of depression. When it comes to
mm,
being an entrepreneur, how
yes.
important do you feel it is in terms of having a support system for when these moments happen? And then if you wouldn't mind sharing, maybe how did you get through
Yeah.
that moment of, again, mental health concern?
So my wife did a dual degree in computing science and psychology. So that she's very
You picked the
smart.
winner. Kim, you're a
I
winner.
mean, she's a
When
very,
you
very smart lady. And I was just sitting there at my keyboard and just staring off into space and not really seeing the screen in front of me, which is very rare for me. I'm always kind of doing something.
Mhm.
And she just came up and said, hey, you let me guess, you've done everything and sort of nothing's coming back at the moment. And I went, yeah, that's right. And often just someone recognizing that that was what was happening is often enough for me. Um, but yeah, I think sometimes just someone recognizing it is enough, or being able to
Mhm.
say, I've I've done everything. I'm waiting for that phone call back. Why isn't the phone call coming back? I've made the sales call. Why aren't they calling me back?
Mhm.
And you realize also with some of that, I'm jumping around a bit, but I did an article on my blog. I've got a tech blog as well. Um, that sometimes the reason someone phones back is not because of you,
Mhm.
and recognizing that it's not all about yourself, as hard as that is. The people phoning you back, they might call you back a week later and say, sorry, last week was mental, my car broke down, I was out of it.
Mhm.
Nothing to do with you, nothing to do with how strong your product is or what you're offering or how you've presented it. It's something going on in their life as well. So I
Mhm.
guess sometimes things aren't always about you as much as we'd like them to be. And recognizing that in a reasonable and strong way is also a big help. Um, Sometimes also you need a mate you can call up and just complain to,
Okay.
and they just go, "Yeah, mate. Oh, yeah, no, you were completely in the right, Andy. You were all good." And that's all they need to do is just say you're completely right and you vented and you're good. So you need sort of someone who just goes, I don't understand what you're talking about, Andy, but I know you're upset and that's fine. So I got a couple of friends like that.
I love it. It sounds like you hit on three important parts. You've got a good partner that cares enough to notice when something's wrong.
Hmm hmm
You internally recognize that it's not all about you. And
hmm
then lastly, you've got somebody that you can call up and vent to.
Yeah.
I think those three things are key and
hmm
they're going to help out a lot of people. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that. And we are coming up to the top of the hour. So just to respect
Yep.
your time, I want to ask a couple of pointed questions, and then I definitely
Go
want
for it.
to share the social media aspect because we want to know how people can reach out to you and discover
Mm.
more about horse records.
Yeah,
One of
sure.
the questions that I'm really excited about, and listeners might get tired of hearing it after like the 17th time.
Nah, they love it.
And
They love it, Paul.
and listen in. So there's a question that I ask, and it's about connection. I'm curious, Andy, and I think I shared mine at the beginning. I might have said it quickly, and you might not have noticed, but I said my middle name when we started. I like to ask the random question, Andy,
Mm-hmm.
what's your middle name?
Stuart.
Stewart. Okay.
Yeah.
And is that Stew or Stua?
Stuart. Yeah. Yeah. So
Beautiful.
I'm a Stuart
Beautiful.
U. Yeah.
All right. And I asked that question namely because that's something that people wouldn't know about Andy
Mm.
outside of ideally listening here. I'm not sure, and I didn't see it on the website anywhere. I didn't see it on
No,
social
I don't
media.
really talk about it. Yeah.
And it's one of those things that just so you understand the context too, mostly we understand that we've got some close people in our lives, typically nuclear family, and those are the folks that we might know their middle names, our children, our parents, our spouses, etc. So I like to share that, namely as a point of
Mm.
connection, so that listeners can know something a little bit more about you and they can really connect more to you. And ideally, you'll get a random email with somebody saying, "Hey, Andy Stewart, we love to do some business with you." So speaking of email, we had talked prior
Mhm.
to, and again, I mentioned what I did, and you'd mentioned something about gift cards where people could
Mm.
actually essentially give the service a test run. Could you share more about that?
Yeah. So with Horse Records, you can join for free and you get two horses for free. So you can enter two of your horses, see if Horse Records is for you. You know, pretty laid back. There's a tutorial you can follow. You can add some things. If you've got more horses, you can go to one of our paid plans. They're in Australian dollars. So the first plan is 7 horses for $12. And then the next plan's 25 horses for $20. So that's Australian dollars. So you sort of get two-thirds of that for the USD
Okay.
at the moment.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
depending on
that.
how
So
currency fluctuates.
yeah, so you can try it out. The other thing is I'm expanding my sponsorship program. So sponsorship from Horse Records is in the form of gift cards. I
Okay.
provide a $25 gift card. So if you are running a horse event, often I provide gift cards for each class. So each winner or first and second place or first, second and third will get a gift card that you guys can give out on behalf of Horse Records and to help support your club. Um, if you are at a horse event, I'm also open to providing a gift card for every entrant.
Okay.
It just depends what the event is. And you guys can email me support@horserecords.info, ask for Andy, and yeah, we'll have a chat. I just need to know what your club is, what state it's in, you know, what the event is, when's the event, etc. Just so you know, the Australian Stock Horse National Show, which is the national show for all stock horses,
Mhm.
is happening in a couple of weeks, and I'm providing a gift card to all exhibitors, which is all the entrants, all the family groups. Basically, they're all getting a gift card to help promote horse records, but also give them something to help manage their horses. So yeah, more than happy to chat to any horse groups in America. I am expanding to America at the moment, so you know, and this is going to be a fairly long-term offer. So if you hear this podcast when it's launched or the month after, send us an email. We'll have a chat.
Excellent. And then just to make sure that the listeners got that, that was support@horserecords.info. Support
Correct. Yeah.
at horserecords.info. Excellent. And Andy, how else can listeners reach out to you? Any social media handles and tags that they can
Yeah. So if you go to horserecords.info, you can scroll down to the bottom and see our Facebook links. It's facebook.com/horse records. I've managed to get that one. We've got an Instagram page as well, which is Horse Records. Once again, I think it's horserecords.app, I think is the Insta page.
Okay.
And there's a LinkedIn as well for more of the corporate stuff. But to be honest, the LinkedIn one's not hugely active at this point. It's Facebook and Insta. That's where the horse people are, which is why I've gone there. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Andy Stewart, thank you so much for joining us here. Really quickly, any last words of inspiration that our listeners can remember you by?
Success is a staircase, not an elevator.
Love it. Success is a staircase, not an elevator. Andy, thank you so much. Andy, it's been a pleasure having you here on the Potpourri Place podcast show for the Everyday Entrepreneur segment. Looking forward to, again, learning more about you, sharing more about you. And listeners, make sure you tap in horserecords.info. Bye for now.